Rise up!
This is the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. I'm your host, Jess Root from CardsWire.com, USA Today's NFL Wire site that covers, of course, the Arizona Cardinals for episode 712. Our reaction show to the Cardinals' most recent loss, a third 27-23 loss at home to the Green Bay Packers, and it's the same thing. Seth Cox, my co-host from RevengeOfTheBirds.com, SB Nation's Arizona Cardinals site, joins me as he does each week. And Seth, it's like the story. It's Groundhog's Day, isn't it? We can't not run the same story where play well, fall apart, lose late. It wasn't the Kyler Murray script and defense script, but it was almost identical to the Indianapolis game.
Yeah, and it's interesting to look at it and see how this has unfolded over the last 5 weeks and the different ways that they found to lose, right? Like, we've seen poor offensive showings with decent defensive efforts that then end in catastrophe. We've seen decent offensive showings with poor defensive efforts that then end in catastrophe. And the reality of it is we just haven't seen a complete game all season by this group at any level, and it shows whether it's the results, it shows whether it's the grades that then are given in the media. It's just the entire thing has been a calamity of errors, and it goes back to something you and I talked about. I think it was a couple weeks ago, but it's just because, again, like you said, it is Groundhog Day, so it's hard to remember when we talked about this. But good teams find ways to win games. Bad teams find ways to continually lose, and teams that we should all have a lot of questions about find ways to lose the same way 5 weeks in a row.
Yes. 27-23 loss. It was a game in which they led by a touchdown. Trey McBride had 2 touchdown catches, 10 catches, 74 yards. Jacoby Brissett threw 2 touchdown passes. They had a decent game from Bam Knight, 14 carries, 57 yards. And they did well on a lot of things. They held Green Bay to under 300 yards at 262. Third down, 3 of 10. The Cardinals did have a turnover. They went 7 for 14 on third down. They had 330 yards. So it's both games that with Jacoby Brissett at quarterback, they surpassed 300 yards. And it was the only game that the Packers, other than their crazy tie against the Dallas Cowboys, where they had allowed more than 300 yards. So there's a lot of things that were good, but ultimately, let's talk about why did they lose this time? How did they lose? Where's the blame this time? What can we point our fingers at? What can we go, this is why they lost?
Well, I think it starts at the top, and it's really easy to criticize coaches when they lose 5 in a row. It really is. But you and I were talking about this since week 1, and it's the fourth quarter defense. I jokingly tweeted out during the game, first fourth quarter punt since week 1. But the reality is that wasn't even good enough, right? Like, so we have, obviously have to give some grace in terms of fourth quarter scores. I understand that, but the Packers scored 14 fourth quarter points. Now, to be fair, it was the first play of the fourth quarter. So they were going to either score 14 fourth quarter points or 14 third quarter points. But needless to say, that's neither here nor there, right? Like you can't give up 21 second half points and win football games. It's not a winning formula. And so that's the easy part. The hard part is, and I immediately jumped on it in the game. And then, it's always good to have people way smarter than you discuss things. And David Bakhtiari, the former All-Pro offensive tackle for the Green Bay Packers, ironically enough, right? Watching his boys play, basically said what a lot of us had been, you and I and our group text had been questioning during the game. What the hell was this offensive scheme? Why was Jonah Williams on an island against Micah Parsons? And I thought Bakhtiari kind of nailed it. The Packer, I know Paris Johnson technically gave up a sack against Micah Parsons, but that was a very, that's one that you could say went on Jacoby. But when they flopped Parsons away from Paris Johnson, you had to adjust your game plan. You had to. And they didn't. And
it's weird because Jonathan Gannon said they didn't have there were some, but there weren't a lot of one-on-ones. Sometimes I know Darren Urban pointed one out, is one of the sacks was Jonah was to push Micah inside to get help from Will Hernandez, and Parsons just beat him on the outside. But it was weird that Parsons I haven't seen that many one-on-ones in I don't know how long. And yeah, but you continue. Sorry.
But that's just it, right? Like, how do you career high 3 sacks? But it's not even 3 sacks, Jess. Like, don't get me wrong. That's a great game. We've seen Chandler Parsons have 4, 5, right? Against a great left tackle in oh goodness, the guy's name is escaping me all of a sudden. He does the podcast with Will Compton. Jeez, Taylor Lewan, right? Like a really good player.
So that was basically the end of Taylor Lewan's career.
Right. But you look at it, he came into this game. Think about this, Jess. He came into this game, 2.5 sacks, 1 tackle for loss, 8 quarterback hits. In this game, he had 3 sacks, 4 tackle for loss, and 5 quarterback hits. He doubled to tripled all of his production to quintupled in one category, all of his production on the season in one game. And that was Bakhtiari's point, right? Like, we had some plays where we wanted him to do X, Y, or Z. You have to deviate from the script when a dude is doing that to you in a game. You can't just keep rolling it back and saying okay, this play he gets some help. He might get a chip or this. No, you just have to go to something else. And I talked about this and I wrote about this. It is very uncommon at the high school level specifically to play against a game wrecker. It is very uncommon. But when you play against a guy that can single-handedly take over games, you game plan for him. And the Cardinals are a fantastically better coaching staff than a very good coaching staff that I am a part of. However, I don't think that there's one of us from an offensive or defensive side of the ball that could have not had a segment of hey, we should probably look to help on Micah Parsons in this game.
We said that Jacoby's going to get killed. but Parsons is going to eat him alive. And that's literally what happened. After getting sacked twice and hit 12 times against the Colts, he was sacked 6 times and hit 12 times against the Packers. And they simply got home more often. And a couple of them were just, oh my gosh, that he had no chance. And we see that happen every once in a while with Kyler Murray as well, is that there will be a game break where there is just simply no hope for him to get out of it, even with his escapability. And yeah, Micah Parsons had a monster game. I felt that game was going to be coming, and it just happened to come the exact week that they showed up in Arizona.
Well, and you look at it though too, Jess. Like there are a couple more plays. Nate Tice, who again, did Blake find out? Does his brother work for the Cardinals? I don't remember. But anyways, Nate Tice sent out a play. They're in a trio bunch formation, right? And they're just running outside zone. It looks like I'm watching the playback right now. So, but it looks like, yeah. So they're in a trio bunch. They motion. Yeah, it's just a zone play. And they solo Micah Parsons with Elijah Higgins.
And that was that tackle for the loss.
And I get it, right? Like Tip Ryman's out, so you got to go with your next guy. But really, like this is the best defensive player in football, and we're gonna our third tight end that's a receiver more than a tight end is going to be asked to block Micah Parsons solo. Like, what are we doing? Like that's a play where you just go like, okay, we're not going to run that this week. Let's get to the next one. And instead it's like, no, we're going to run this play. And you're like, wait, what? Like, and so like, those are the things to me that you can put your finger on, because people want to go, oh, it's Kyler's fault. Oh, it's the defense's fault. Oh, it's this. No. When you lose 5 games in a row, it's not an individual or even a unit's fault. It starts at the top, and we can have the conversation about Michael Bidwell whenever we want to, but it starts at the top, and the top of the food chain is Jonathan Gannon, and Jonathan Gannon and his staff have put together piss poor performances now 5 weeks in a row, and they put together piss poor defensive performances in the fourth quarter for 7 straight weeks. That's unacceptable, especially when you're a defensive head coach, right, Jess?
Yeah. So one of those things that I no one is talking about, really. Everyone's talked about the pressure on Drew Petzing entering this year. I remember showing up. I can't remember what show it was. Whether it was a radio show or a podcast appearance that I made, and they asked me, "What's the pressure on Drew Petzing?" I'm like, "How much pressure? Like the offense has been good. Like granted, this year it's not been good, but the last 2 years, the offense was not the problem, and they had a garbage defense for the last 2 years overall, and they invested heavily in the defense. I thought that the pressure should have been on Nick Rallis, but everyone sings praises of Nick Rallis because he's so creative this, so creative that. But now we're looking at fourth quarter performances that are just, they can't get off the field. They consistently can't get off the field in the second half. Now, was that part of it? The Packers have a good offense. But when you have a lead, it's just the Cardinals, they don't know how to put everything together all at once. They haven't done that in a while, because then you look at offensively in the fourth quarter, they had a great game on third down, 7 for 14, but in the fourth quarter, they went 0 for 2 on third down and 0 for 2 on fourth down. And you can look at you can question some of the play calls, like the 4th and 1, the QB sneak. And that didn't work out. And my son and I were talking about it during the game. Is interesting that how the Cardinals insist on doing like that tush push style, that immediate rush up the middle, and not like a traditional QB sneak where you wait a half moment, like what Josh Allen does, and wait for one side to open, find out where the push is coming from, and then go that way. And so that play didn't work out. Like, I don't know if I would call it a bad play call, because 4th and 1 QB sneaks are successful all over the league. But like, that was a call that didn't work. After they scored right before halftime and they decided to kick it into the end zone, and then they promptly 2 plays later kicked a 61-yard field goal, that decision didn't work out. It just feels like everything that they do fails to work out. And while Jacoby had a great game, an overall solid game, the one thing that he is not, he has shown that in the last 2 weeks, he is not clutch at making great plays in the moments they need them. And that's no knock on Jacoby Brissett. There aren't a lot of quarterbacks that can do that consistently, but when they've needed him in those final 2 drives against Indianapolis and Green Bay, he wasn't anywhere. He wasn't on target. There was nothing there. There was nothing there for him. He had the one big throw leading to it before that, but once you got in the red zone, he wasn't good.
No, he hasn't. And that's, one of those situations where this group and what they're doing is just, I don't know, man. Like, I don't even know how to describe it anymore at this point, right? Because it's consistently the same. But you mentioned a couple of things, Jess. Like, the first thing you mentioned is the pressure on Rallis, right? Because they've invested so heavily in that situation. And I get it. They're going through the malaise of midseason injuries. They've never even had their first round pick. Their first round pick from last year is coming off another, minor but injury still, right? And so their guys that they're rolling with consistently are, usually this is a joke, right? But it's not really a joke. I think Calais Campbell and I were born like a year apart. Like, it's yeah, like, I'm literally 9 months older than Calais. Like, this, and by the way, it's a great story. It is. And I don't want anybody to take this the wrong way, but if Calais Campbell's your best defensive player, that's a problem. It's 1,000% a problem. Like, it's a cool story, but it's a problem. And then on the offensive side of the ball, you kind of mentioned it, right? Like, this was the first time the last 2 weeks that they've had their ideal starting offensive line from last year together. It's just that I don't know. Is it the scheme? Like, are they just not good? Is it? There was an interesting stat. I don't know if you saw it that Blake reposted, or it might not have been Blake. It might have been Kent Hoder. Yeah, it was Kent Hoder posted, and I don't know if you saw it. But Jacoby Brissett's deep ball and Jacoby Brissett's short pass time to throw the exact same time. So at 3 seconds, this dude just lets the ball rip. It doesn't matter. It's he's either going deep or he's checking down. But like, that's it. And so it's interesting to say that this is a group that, people wanted to lament Tyler's, he leaves the pocket too fast. But I mean, this dude's taken 24 quarterback hits. I'm remembering that correctly, right?
Yes.
20,
12 and 12, both games.
24 quarterback hits in 2 games. I guess that's the cool thing, right? You're like, hey, look, he stays in the pocket. And
He does, but and you look at the end of game failures that he's had, that has to play into it, right? Like the amount of times he's gotten knocked down, whether it is, slightly gun shy or just a little bit off on his timing as the result of being hit so many times in the game. That's hard to do. And other than the fact that the Cardinals don't have a clutch bone in their bodies these days. Whatever it is, they got two clutch plays in the first 2 weeks of the year. Although they came in desperate situations, which could have ended up in a loss. And since then, there's been nothing clutch about them. Kyler Murray led them to 14 fourth quarter points against the Seahawks, and defensively they've gotten like 100% nothing clutch. They've just been a bad defense fourth quarter. But it's tough. It's tough to be excited about this team. They're now 2-5, going to the bye, and honestly, they're not out, like their hopes aren't done, but they are, because the way things look over the final 10 games of the year, if you think that they have a chance at making the playoffs, they've got to win 10 games. They've got to go 8-2 over their last 10 games, and every single opponent after the bye has a better record than they do. Every single one. I believe 8 of those games are against or 6 of them are with winning records, 2 or 3 that are at 500, or maybe 2 with 500 and 2 that are losing records of the final 10 games. But they have currently at 2-5 a worse record than every one of their opponents in the second half of the season, which, is there anything about what we've seen from them this year in 7 games that makes us believe that they can go 8-2 over the final 10? No. So, like, kind of best case scenario, you're looking at 7 wins.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, like, I laughed about it the other day. I was joking with some buddies about it. Like, I know people, there's a section, and some of it's spearheaded by fans, some of it's spearheaded by local media, that are just like, oh, Jacoby's a better fit. Like, he fits okay, well, then you're going to go, based on what we've seen, they're going to go 3-14, because without Kyler Murray, they're 1-10 in Jonathan Gannon's career. With Kyler Murray, they're somehow 13-17. And if he's that bad of a fit and dragging them to 13-17, and the guy that's a better fit right now is 0-2, and they're 1-10 with all the better fits, then it's definitely more of a coaching problem than it is. And that's kind of what this whole thing comes down to, right? Like, you've had 2 different quarterbacks. The quarterbacks have had different results in terms of their success on offense, and your results in the games are almost the same. There's only one constant, and so
that's fourth quarter failures. Quarter failures. Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit. Coming next on the Rise Up Here podcast, our Cardinals Talk on the Web. Why is the offense seemingly better with Jacoby Brissett? That's coming next on Rise Up Here. We're back on the Rise Up Here podcast, our Cardinals Talk on the Web. There's a lot of reasons why they lost the game, but there's been a lot of talk. And in fairness, Jonathan Gannon's, the organization hasn't wavered. Kyler Murray is the guy. Jacoby Brissett is the backup. But there is certainly a lot of chatter all over the internet about Jacoby should be the guy moving forward. And it is hard to deny, because, those first 5 games of the season, when the offense was so inconsistent and sometimes just really bad, Kyler hasn't looked in rhythm in the passing game consistently. There's been stretches where it looks really, really good. Then Jacoby comes in, and the passing game suddenly looks decent. The offense moves the ball. They hit 400 yards against the Colts, 330 against the Packers. Why do you think that it is that the offense suddenly looks better more often with Brissett?
I think there's a combination of things. One, we looked at the overall usage in in those games. Again, and we'd have to extrapolate some of the things like design runs for the quarterback. I don't think there's been a ton right this year versus scrambles. I'd have to dive like deep into that one. And things of that nature. But when you look at a couple things this season, the first thing that really kind of comes to mind is you look at drop backs, right? So plays that are designed to be passes, and they do call more pass plays with Jacoby, and so I don't know if that's by design or if that's just a product of their being on their fourth and fifth running backs right now, right? Like that's always a tough thing to tell so far.
I almost wonder because did the injuries to Trey Benson and James Conner force Drew Petzing to start looking at the passing game differently? Like, he is so dead set on running the ball and establishing the run that it was to the detriment of the offense as a whole, between the struggles on the offensive line, James Conner being a little bit behind what he was before, Trey Benson not playing consistently, playing in a new role. It was that insistence of running the ball instead of opening up the passing game and going with kind of what they've been doing the last 2 weeks. I wonder if this had been the game plan before then, would we even be having this conversation? Because it would have looked better to begin with.
Yeah, and that's a fair question. I mean, I don't worry about. I try not to look into the of that portion of things, because I try to look into it as how do these turn out, so to speak, and what what's actually happening, and can we look at it from that perspective? And so there's a couple things. So in Jacoby's 2 games, he's dropped back 93 times. He has 94 on the season, but we all remember the one to Tip Ryman, RIP, right? So he's dropped back 93 times in the last 2 games. For 81 attempts. Now that's where it gets interesting, because the 81 attempts would be only 80 less than Kyler has in 5 games. And for the most part, I mean, again, there was a snap in the game, but for the most part, Kyler has played every snap of every game since, like I said, the one. So you look at it from the drop back point of view, right? So 93 dropbacks in 2 games. That's 46 and a half dropbacks a game. So call it 45-ish for easy math, right? And then Kyler is dropping back 39 times a game. So it is about 7 to 8 more pass or more dropbacks in a game. What's more interesting about that to me is that in those games, the Cardinals have led, right? Like, I guess they were down a little bit, but for the most part, they've led in those games, right? So it wasn't like they needed to drop back and continue to throw. On the other hand, right, sans the Seattle game, the it's been the opposite for Kyler, right? They've been up and they've been kind of limiting so you do wonder where that comes from. And it's no shock that in the Seattle game, 52 dropbacks for Kyler. So his most of the season was in the game that they trailed for most of the game, and they threw. And that was the game that, you and I discussed, that they probably looked the best. And I know the stats don't show it, but that second half, he probably had his best performance of the season. So there was that. The other thing is that Jacoby doesn't move well. Now, he has avoided some sacks this year, but we just talked about it. He's been hit 24 times in 2 games. He's been sacked 8 times in 2 games. Kyler's been sacked 16 times in 5 games, and 6 of those sacks came in that Seattle game. And so, but the stat that kind of tells the tale, so to speak, is that Jacoby's willing to sit in there and take a hit as he's delivering a pass. And so that's the hard part, so to speak. And so he's willing to make those throws down the field more consistently. So those are a couple things. It's interesting to kind of break it down. Again, I'm not in love with some of these stats and stuff like that, because I when people are like, oh, the first read, I'm like, well, how do you know who the first read was? Like, you're not in the play call. Like, but first read throws are roughly the same and things like that. So it's interesting to look at it. The drop percentage is basically the same. Obviously, the average depth of target for Jacoby is 3 yards deeper, so that's something that makes a difference, right? In his numbers being up. But yeah, so I mean, the dropbacks and the attempts per game skew towards Jacoby. So that, like you said, begs the question of, like, is that a game plan thing, or is that this is how that quarterback plays? Now, we can obviously acknowledge that the running game is not nearly as effective without Kyler. That's just the reality of it. But it's also been an issue that they've been without Trey and James Conner. And so those are 2 things to look at. I thought I honestly was not overly impressed as much as I was in game 1 with Jacoby in this game. I thought this game, he actually held on to the ball too long, trying to make big throws down the field, and in turn took some unnecessary sacks, hits, things of that nature, because it's a fine line. And again, the offensive line was an issue, so I don't want to take away from that. But it was, it was one of those situations where I feel like he did was trying to do almost a little too much in the game, and that really came out obviously in that scramble where he tried to scramble and got hit, sacked, and fumbled. That was kind of all on him on that situation. So those are what you look at in this is he's a guy that's going to sit in the pocket. He's going to push the ball down the field. He's going to be able to run those play action passes and dropbacks a little more consistently. And so again, it's more of the concepts that really kind of are interesting to me. You know, when you look at it, and people can say whatever they want. I genuinely don't really care, but Jacoby's got two numbers that kind of stand out to me versus Kyler. And these are play calling things. These aren't quarterbacking things. Jacoby's dropbacks, 33% are play action. Kyler's are 25. So not a huge difference. But where's that differential? Kyler's is 25.1. Where's that differential? Jacoby's screen percentage is 6%. Kyler's is 14. So again, I'm not in the game planning systems. I'm not in, all of those. But those aren't Kyler calls, right? Like that's not Kyler making the decision to throw a screen. So why are you calling a screen at over double the percentage with Kyler than you are Jacoby? And that's a question that, I would hope somebody would be willing to ask. And I know that it'll never get asked, but like, what is the point of that? And by the way, the screens do not work with Jacoby. He has 5 completions on 6 attempts for -1 yard.
Ooh.
And so that's the question. The interesting thing to me, more than anything, Jess, their play action numbers, like numbers, are really, really, really comparable. Obviously Jacoby has played less games, so we're working more of a percentage base. But to be fair, Kyler only has 6 more attempts on play action than Jacoby. But 18 completions on 28 attempts for Jacoby in play action. So 64.3% completion for 192 yards, so 6.9 yards per attempt. Kyler is 24 of 34, so 70.6% completion percentage, 233 yards, just 6.9%. So that's kind of where it's at. To me, is that the play action game that should be utilized at a commiserate percentage is going to screen game with Kyler, and it's not for Jacoby. And it's like, if they're both effective, Kyler slightly more, but if they're both effective at it, why is one doing it at a higher clip than the other? Especially when, in theory, your run game is more effective with Kyler, because you had, and I'm not even putting Kyler in this portion, your run game is more effective with Kyler because you had Trey Benson and James Conner for most of his 5 games. And now you're running play action with Zonovan, Bam Knight, and Michael Carter. And again, not shots at those guys, but just the reality, right? So that's the question I would have. And that's the biggest thing to me, because the no play action game is off the eye test. It is exactly what you think. Jacoby pushes the ball down the field more than Kyler does in that realm. But off of play action, you would think that they'd want to get Kyler into more play action and things like that. And so that's where I would have those questions and want to know the schematic reasons behind, why are we not using this more for a guy like Kyler, where you play action, you get him outside the pocket, and he has choices. And why is that not happening as much? But at the end of the day, we're just analysts that watch the games and will comment on it. We're not going to get the deep dive of those questions and why they're happening.
Coming up next on the Rise Up Here podcast, Best Cardinals Talk on the Web. Let's do one little bit more, the good and the bad on the defense. That's coming next on Rise Up Red. We're back on the Rise of Secret podcast, Best Cardinals Talk on the Web. Time to talk about the defense again, the good and the bad. I mean, we know the bad is the fourth quarter, but there are a couple other things that continue to be a thing, and that is, and it happened in the fourth quarter. Like there were two guys against the Colts where you're like, you gotta limit them, and like Jonathan Taylor and Tyler Warren. Guess who hurt them? And the same thing would be said about the Packers, Josh Jacobs and Tucker Kraft. And what happened? Josh Jacobs scored the game-winning touchdown. He had 2 touchdowns on the afternoon, and that's when he was banged up. Now, he only had 55 rushing yards, but he also only had 13 carries as they were trying to nurse him through that calf injury. But he averaged over 4 yards a carry. He wasn't particularly explosive, but he was efficient when he was in the game because his long of the afternoon was 10 yards. He scored twice. Tucker Kraft had 5 catches for 15 to 8 yards and 1 touchdown. So basically, if the goal is to limit their best weapons, the Cardinals defensively, while some of the metrics look good, 262 yards is good, 3 of 10 on third down is good. They get off the field. The opposing offense only had 25 minutes and 50 seconds on the field. They just don't stop things. They don't stop things when it matters. They don't start the players that they need to stop. And interestingly enough is that they averaged more per play than the Cardinals did. It's just that they had 17 fewer plays than the Cardinals.
Well, and that goes back to what we've talked about, complementary football, Jess. And this week, I know people are riding high on Jacoby and things of that nature, but there was, the classic Cardinal thing, the thing that we've lamented for a long time about this specific iteration of the Cardinals. You come out in the third quarter and your defense gets a stop. They force a 3-and-out, just like, holy cow. And you get a punt, you get the ball back, and you move the ball a little bit too, right? You go 26 yards in 3 plays, you get a PI, Marvin Harrison, and you're in a good spot, and your quarterback fumbles and gives the ball back to the other team. And that's the complementary football that we talk about so often, because they, again, just couldn't get it right after that. The Packers go on to score, as we know, or tie the game up at 13-13. And then what happens? Jacoby takes them down. They score. Now it's 20-13. You're feeling good again. The Packers go down and score again. Now it's 20-20. The Cardinals get a field goal, and you're like, okay. And then they get a stop. They get this stop. And I'm not going to lament too much about the decision to go for it on fourth down. I'll lament the play. I'm sure you would too, right? Like that play, but you go for it because, let's be honest, Jess, you can't trust your defense in the fourth quarter. So you're saying to yourself, like, I really don't want these guys to get the ball back, right? Like they get the ball back. We've seen this song and dance for 4 straight weeks. We know what's going to happen. And here's the thing, Jess. They get a stop. They get it to 4th and 2. And they give up a big play. And that was the beginning of the end of the game. Like, I know we can point to that they had the ball last for the second week in a row. I know technically they didn't, but they had the ball last for the second week in a row, and they didn't even get a good play into the end zone at all. We can talk about that. That can be a conversation. But Jess, they gave up that fourth down. And now you're going, okay, we got to just hold them to a field goal. No big deal. Field goal's no big. And then we're set up for a field goal to win the game. The only thing you can't do, Jess, is what? Give up a touchdown. You cannot give up a touchdown in that scenario. Jess, 3 plays to score. They ran the ball 3 times and scored. They didn't even like play action you once. They ran the ball 3 times. Like, it was almost like they gave up that pass to Tucker Kraft, by the way. Just like Jess said, the one guy you can't let beat you in that scenario. And you solo him with a safety at 10 yards. Like, that's just, again, bad defensive scheme. And they go 3 run plays for a touch. Come on, you got to have a little pride. You got, I mean, something. And so that's the frustration of it. We mentioned it, Calais again, Dalvin Tomlinson again, but those dudes, here's the thing. They played 55 snaps combined. So when you're only getting 55 snaps from your best 2 front 7 players, the rest of it's going to be pitiful.
Yeah, and pressure wasn't good. Zaven had the one good. He had the sack. Looked great on that play. Very strong. But they only hit Jordan Love twice, and that's in comparison to the 12 times that Jacoby Brissett was hit. They got to Jordan Love only twice. Will Johnson had a rough game. The penalized 3 times. Although I would say that almost all 3, I think every single one of those penalties that he was called for was really, really, really questionable in each instance. It was almost as if, the Cardinals have we need to humble him. And so they're like, we're going to call it really, really close. I didn't think, honestly, any of the flags should have been thrown on him. But even still, those penalties hurt the team. They only had 2 hands-on balls in coverage, and then Calais Campbell knocked one down at the line of scrimmage. And so while they had some good raw numbers, we know that the fourth quarter was bad. They weren't generating pressure on the quarterback. They didn't get their hands on footballs, and they let them, and they weren't particularly stout against the run. So there was not any one thing that they did well except for get off the field on 3rd down. Although they did fail, they did convert. What was it on 4th down? They went 2 for 3 on 4th down. So they went 3 for 10. They held them to 3 for 10, but they picked up another 2 conversions. So basically, it was 50% where they couldn't get off the field.
Yeah, and it's just, I mean, at the end of the day, this is always going to come back to something. And I was talking to a buddy who's a big Eagles fan that I coach with, and he kind of chuckled because he's like, that dude can game plan the hell out of things when he's got a great pass rush. Outside of that, he struggles. And that's really what it's come down to, right? And
it really has. And it's not for a lack of trying, because you go out and you get Josh Sweat, you draft BJ Angelari, you draft Jordan Birch, you trade for and re-sign Baron Browning, you sign Justin Jones, you sign Calais Campbell, and you just can't get anything out of those guys. You draft Darius Robinson and Walter. You're just not getting what they needed. They need that up front pass rushing presence consistently, and then it kind of fixes things. But because you don't, their defense, kind of like last year, look better than they actually are.
Yeah, and that's the hard part, because it's so bad. And our buddy Johnny tweeted this out not too long ago, right? But like, they're literally the worst defense in the NFL in the fourth quarter. I mean, statistically, in almost every single category, they are the worst, and they've given up the most fourth quarter points. And now that Kyler is not the quarterback, people are going, oh, the defense is a problem in the fourth quarter. When you and I had been saying for weeks prior, like, hey, this defense in the fourth quarter is a problem. No, they just don't sustain drives. The defense is on the field too much. They just, they're tired. Okay, so what was the excuse this week? They had a 9-minute advantage in time of possession. You mentioned it. They ran 17 more plays, Jess. 17. What is the excuse then? And if you couldn't see it 5 weeks ago when Jess and I were pointing it out, then you were being willfully ignorant or looking to find or place blame somewhere else, because the reality of the situation was it was a problem. It was a problem game one, and we said, let's see, maybe they didn't want to show anything, right? It was a problem game two, and you and I were like, this is kind of a problem. And then game three, we're like, oh yeah, this is a problem. This is the issue with this team. No, they got to get a quarterback. All right, well, now they have your guys' quarterback in there that you wanted to see. He's putting up stats, and the result is the exact same.
Literally the exact same, losing late by a little bit, so Jacoby Brissett's 2 losses have been by their combined 9 points, right?
8 points.
7 points.
Yeah,
8 points. Yeah. 2 points. And Kyler's 3 losses are by a combined
5 points.
5 points.
Yeah, and so it's tough, man. It's been ugly. And again, I think the biggest one was kind of what you stated in this game, Justin, and that's what people are really overlooking, is that it's really hard to win games when the other team is getting significantly more yards per play. So like, the Cardinals are running more plays. They have a much higher time of possession, but the other team gets more yards when they do run their plays. Like,
yes, they do. It's bad.
That's kind of what the issue is more than anything else, wouldn't you say?
It is, and that's 100% it. And we could gripe on from. We'll spare you more griping. What we're planning on one more show. The Cardinals are on their bye, so there's no game to prepare for. But we will come later this week to our mid-season report card. Obviously, the grades won't be all that great, but some of them won't be terrible. So until then, that's Seth Cox. I'm Jess Root. Thanks for listening. As always, we'll be back again soon.
Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up, See Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms, so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise up, Red Sea, be Red, See Red, and of course, Rise Up, See Red.
Run!